up as a kid. All a nigga wanna have was a Burberry scarf and $3 in my pocket. Instead I got beat with a switch, but I don't give a fuck, but it's on my body. Scars all up on me, but I run around from.
My last segment, I want to talk about Mike Tomlin. Now, Mike Tomlin last season was heavily regarded as Coach of the Year, based on what he was able to do with this Pittsburgh Steelers team once Ben Roethlisberger went down with his season-ending injury. And a lot of people felt the season was over for the Pittsburgh Steelers and that the Steelers should just go ahead and tank for a quarterback or tank for a high draft pick. Well, Mike Tomlin didn't do that. He said, you know what? We're still going to try to compete even though we don't have our starting quarterback in Ben Roethlisberger. So what does Mike Tomlin do? He takes Pittsburgh to an 8-8 record, and they were still fairly competitive in every single game they played in, and they were all the way into the playoffs until the final week of the 2019 NFL season. Well, despite Mike Tomlin having that incredible season, given what he was able to do with several key players like James Conner and Juju Smith-Schuster missing significant games with injuries, I still think that Mike Tomlin has a lot to prove for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, what Mike Tomlin did last season was incredible. What Mike Tomlin did basically was going in and taking the geometry test and passing it without a calculator. That's basically what Mike Tomlin did. Like, he did an incredible job. But that was just one great season that we saw out of Mike Tomlin. Mike Tomlin had his back against the wall. He had no Ben Roethlisberger. He had Juju Smith-Schuster and James Conner missing time of injuries. So he really, without those great players, had to really coach this Pittsburgh Steelers team up. And he did it by relying on his defense to get stops and make plays. Well, this season, now that this team is fully healthy, I think there's going to be a lot of pressure on Mike Tomlin to perform. Because a lot of people are going to be saying, hey, we went 8-8 without our starting quarterback and several injuries. So now that we're fully healthy, Mike Tomlin, this team should without a doubt not only make it to the playoffs, but make a playoff run. And Mike Tomlin, despite being one of the best coaches in the NFL, I think has kind of underperformed over the last few seasons. And I mean, Mike Tomlin, don't get me wrong, he's a great coach and all, but I do think it's pretty fair to say that Mike Tomlin has underachieved besides going into 2019. Other than 2019, Mike Tomlin has fairly underachieved. I mean, Mike Tomlin has had some of the best rosters in the NFL history. I mean, you had Antonio Brown, Big Ben, and Le'Veon Bell all in their prime. And you still weren't able to win the Super Bowl with those guys. You had a top 5 offensive line as well over the last 4 or 5 seasons. You had one of the best rosters, if not the best roster in the NFL, and you weren't able to capitalize off it. And then you also have the Pittsburgh Steelers losing a lot of games that they shouldn't lose against teams that they had no business losing to. So, I mean, it's fair to say that Mike Tomlin is a great coach, but he still has a lot to prove. He has to prove that he can get this Pittsburgh Steelers team not only to the playoffs, but that he can still get this Pittsburgh Steelers team to an AFC Championship game appearance, or at least a Super Bowl. Because that is the level of expectation in Pittsburgh. The level of expectation every single year, regardless of injuries, is to always win a Super Bowl. And those expectations should never change, unless you're going off what happened this last season. But I mean, Mike Tomlin has a lot to prove in 2020 for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And I don't think his job is done yet. He still has to prove to me that he deserves to be considered one of the best coaches in the NFL. He did an amazing job in 2019. An incredible job. The best job of his whole entire coach's career. But can he once again keep that up in 2020 with a fully healthy roster? And that's why I still have a big question mark around Mike Tomlin. Now, Mike Tomlin has proved that he deserves to be the head coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers for the next years to come. But can he prove to the Steelers fan base that he has what it takes to get this Steelers team to the promised land, which is a Lombardi trophy? And I mean, Mike Tomlin, before 2019, you could say has been the most underachieving coach in the NFL other than Jason Garrett. I mean, Mike Tomlin has had stacked rosters and great teams, but I mean, he's came up short the last few seasons. So, I mean, I think that Mike Tomlin still has a lot that he has to prove for the Pittsburgh Steelers in 2020. This is going to be a really good team that a lot of people aren't really talking about that much when it comes to the Super Bowl conversation. Like, anytime the biggest discussion on your team is who is going to be your quarterback of the future or who your backup quarterback is going to be, that should go to show you of how good of a team that you have. So, I mean, Mike Tomlin has a really good team with a really loaded wide receiver group. You got Deontay Johnson, Juju Smith-Schuster, James Washington, Chase Claypool. You still have a very good offensive line. You got Big Ben coming back from his season-ending injury. You got to still have the best defense in the NFL from a talent standpoint, in my opinion. So, I mean, this is still a very good team. But Mike Tomlin has to prove that he can finally get this Steelers team to the playoffs, because this is a Steelers team that hasn't been to the playoffs in a while. And the Ravens and the Browns have all gotten better. So can Mike Tomlin get this Steelers team not only to the playoffs, but can they make some noise in the postseason? So Mike Tomlin still has a lot that he has to prove for the Steelers this upcoming NFL season.